What's up, YouTube? It's your boy Marquis on deck. Today I decided to do my own spooky scary Sunday. Yes, I'll be doing this every Sunday, just like my man Corey's Pigeon. I thought, he's on vacation, so why don't I take not his spot, but like covers of while he's gone and shit. But anyways, I'm gonna enjoy this. It's just 20 minutes, so grab snacks, whatever. I'm hungry as shit right now. I'm like, fuck, I need to upload something. But anyways, let's get straight to the shit, man.
He didn't know if she was just trying to get free drinks by flirting, so he told her that they didn't have much money. However, Candace was the one who offered, and she kept buying more and more. Kevin started getting confused as to who she liked more between him and David and why she was being so generous. A little later, they both carried David out the bar. She kept telling him to go home with her, but he was so out of it he could barely answer. Kevin told her that he couldn't let him go anywhere as he didn't want David to wake up in a random house without a car and not remembering what happened. Candace kept pushing it, saying that she would take care of him, but Kevin told her that the only way David was going anywhere was if he tagged along. Immediately, she started flirting with Kevin and offered to get his friend a taxi and said they could drive to her place alone. At this point, Kevin had a few drinks and was pretty buzzed, so he agreed. They got David a taxi to go home and the two walked to Candace's car. Everything was happening so quickly and he started feeling uneasy. They got in the car and she drove the street when she asked if he wanted to stop at the store and get some more to drink. Kevin wanted to be able to carry himself throughout the rest of the night, so he declined. He did find Candace attractive and he didn't want to seem lame, so he told her to get a pint with some apple juice to chase it. She went in the store and came out with a lot more than just a pint. Kevin assumed that she wanted to drink as well, but
I'm getting Cardi B vibes.
Okay.
But anyways, get to the shit.
throughout the car ride, Candace kept telling him to drink more and more. He somehow managed to drink all the juice, so he pretended to drink the bottle by spitting the liquor in the apple juice container. He then tossed the apple juice out the window before she could see it and just drank a little more from the remaining bottle. Kevin was able to make her believe he was actually drunk, but in reality he was simply buzzed. They drove up to her house and he pretended to trip and stumble, so she helped him walk inside. The front door was unlocked, but she made sure it was locked when they got in. Kevin thought that was strange, but he didn't think too much of it, so he told her that he had to use the bathroom. He walked inside and looked at himself in the mirror. He just felt strange. There was definitely something off. He turned on the sink to make noise and made himself puke up the liquor he drank. Kevin flushed and went to the sink and started drinking the tap water to sober up. He just didn't want to be drunk, but still wanted to hook up with Candace. Kevin turned the sink off when he suddenly heard her talking to someone outside. He's drunk as hell. He could barely stand up. You do it. Who was she talking to? And do what? Kevin walked out the bathroom, and the moment he stepped into the living room, he saw Candace walking into another room. That strange, very bright red hair. He didn't see her face or anything. Hey, where you going? She walked back into the dark living room and up to Kevin and said, "Let's go in my room." He looked at her bright red hair and into her eyes. They were different. Her face was different. It was another girl with the same hair. And that's when Kevin realized it was another girl with the same wig on. It was a wig the entire time. Kevin's heart felt like it stopped, but he tried to look like he had no idea it was a different girl. Kevin kind of smiled and told her that he just needed to use the bathroom one more time and told her he was sorry he was so drunk. She said, "It's fine, just hurry up in there." Kevin went into the bathroom and locked the door. He heard her whispering something to someone again, this time thinking that he heard a male voice whisper back. Something sketchy was going on and he had to get out of the house. Kevin opened the bathroom window and jumped straight out of it and ran faster than he ever had in his life. Now looking back, he kept running down the main road until he saw a CVS and stood straight at the front of the store in front of the camera. Kevin then called a taxi and went home. He tried thinking about what happened
Be like Kevin. Be like Kevin, bro. Fuck that shit that night.
Back when Sarah was 17, she worked at a small local bakery. There were less than 15 employees spread across all the night and day shifts, so they only had a few people working during the day. One of these people was Dave, the delivery driver. From the first time they met, Dave immediately gave Sarah an off vibe. He was in his mid-50s and way too friendly to a teenage girl. But the boss told her that yes, he could be annoying, but no one worked harder than he did, so just ignore his antics. Sarah then recalled that when she signed the paperwork, they never asked her to submit a background check, and in hindsight, that should have been red flag number 2. Over the course of the year or so that she worked with Dave, Sarah tried very hard to ignore him. He was rarely outright creepy, but he was always just a bit too friendly. He would stick around long after his shift was over to talk to her and another pastry chef. He always wanted to lick the bowl after she finished making Rice Krispie treats. He would always stand in front of the racks or equipments or ingredients just enough that sometimes her hand would brush him while reaching for something. Dave always stood just a little too close. Dave was constantly asking Sarah about her life, what she liked, what she did for fun, if she had a boyfriend. Almost daily, he would tell her how
If you're liking this, please subscribe. I'm trying to rise my channel.
Boy, if you don't nice girl like her should have a boyfriend, how maybe a boyfriend would be good for her. Sarah let this slide because sometimes older people can say things that were meant differently in their time, but then it was the concert invites. Every other week he had tickets to one concert or another. Once he figured out Sarah's favorite genre of music, it was almost exclusively tickets to bands she desperately wanted to see. But she also knew that she should not go anywhere with him. Then her birthday came. He bought her a t-shirt and it was 2 sizes too small. He told her to try it on after work and text him a photo, and proceeded to give Sarah his phone number. He didn't ask for her number. She said no. He asked the other pastry chef for her number, but she had her back and refused as well. He also brought 2 tickets from another band that Sarah had been wanting to see. VIP section, 21 plus only. He said he could get her in. She just had to go with him and him alone. This continued for a while. Sarah brought it up to one of her bosses, but they laughed it off as, oh, classic Dave. When he wanted a hug on his birthday and hugged her without consent, there's Dave for ya. Offering to get her booze or pot, oh, Dave, you scamp. When he pulled up his shirt and showed his abdominal scar from a snowboarding accident, well, that's just Dave. No respect for boundaries. But he was a good worker. Sarah even considered having one of her big strong male friends come in under the guise of being her boyfriend just to placate Dave. She was repulsed by him, but he hadn't really done anything to classify himself as a predator. Besides asking for her number, he had never tried to straight up harass her, and besides the odd hug or two that she was too shy and afraid to refuse, he hadn't gotten super physical. Then one day, Dave was gone. His name disappeared from the employee roster. Sarah's boss asked to see her in the office. She informed her that Dave was no longer employed at their business. Dave had been fired. He was fired because Dave was a convicted sex offender. There's one count kidnapping a minor from the mid-90s and another count that she doesn't want to think about. They had never background checked him, and when they contacted a friend in the police department, they found out that Dave had been lying on lots of paperwork, hiding the fact that he was a convicted felon and not notifying anyone when he moved. Once they brought this information to the police department's attention, they had a few more charges to add. They found out because apparently he had been stalking and harassing one of the clients he delivered to. After his termination, Dave showed up to work one day. He had a weapon with him, but Sarah never found out what he had. They told him to leave or the police would be called, and he ended up leaving in handcuffs. Sarah was extremely relieved that she wasn't there that day. It's been a while since she worked at the bakery, but sometimes she still thinks about how badly things could have gotten had she gone to even one of those concerts with him.
It would have been dead!
When I was 9, I usually got home from school about an hour before my mom got home from work. I lived super close, so she figured it was fine. I did the usual thing, which was to make sure I locked the front door and double check that the back door leading to the patio was also locked. I played as much PlayStation as possible in my room before my mom came home and made me do homework. But on this particular day while playing, I heard this noise coming from outside my window. It was kind of like the sound of a cat, but my cat had been missing for over 3 months. Hope struck and I thought maybe he finally came back. I ran downstairs to check, but to my surprise, there was a guy standing on my patio. It was a tall man with black hair covering half of his eyes. I could hear him making high-pitched sounds, almost like a cat meowing. A brown liquid was running down from his mouth, and I could see him spitting out my dad's stomped cigarettes. He was actually eating from the ashtray.
Nigga!
So loud that the man must have heard it. He didn't react. He just kept on eating from the ashtray. I ran upstairs to my room and called my mom, who then called the cops, laying in my bed under my sheets, shivering with fear. The next thing I remember is the police arriving on the road by my yard. I hear them talking to the guy. The high-pitched sound was more frequent and louder. I decided to look through the window, feeling safe now that the cops were there. The man suddenly charged the female police officer with full force and he knocked her out cold. The male officer then immediately tased the guy and handcuffed him. One of my neighbors made me come down and she took care of me until my mom came back home. The police took the creepy guy with them in the car and left. The male officer came back
Bullshit. Neck-ass.
later that night and sat down with me and my mom to talk. He explained that the guy on my patio was actually diagnosed with severe autism. He had escaped the facility where mentally challenged people lived, located around 5 kilometers from where my house was. He explained that the guy had actually been living in my house 5 years ago, but he had been forced to move when his mom, his only caretaker, died. The poor guy probably thought he would find his mom in this house. He missed the routines and he missed living there with his mom. The police had to move him from the house that time 5 years ago. This was the reason he reacted the way he did when the police came that day. Still frightened, I told the police officer that he needed to make sure that this would never happen again, and he promised it wouldn't. After a few sleepless nights, my life got back to normal. The years went by and the guy didn't come back. At this time, my mom and dad had moved out. I bought the house from them and I'm still living here till this day. I was enjoying my morning coffee on the patio when I see this random guy stopping on the road by my fence. He just stands there, looking at me. I look at him and give him a nod, and then I hear the high-pitched noises. His hair had turned gray, but the high-pitched sounds made me realize. My heart started racing and I instantly remembered the reason why he was back. I realized that he must have managed to escape again. 16 years later and he was back to look for his mom. I decided to carefully ask him if he wanted to come down to the patio. He instantly jumped the fence and I started to think he would knock me out like he did to that police officer. But he didn't. He looked at me and smiled. We went inside and his face lit up with pure joy. He was home. It reminded him of the life he had with his mom. All of a sudden he sat down on my couch, turned on the TV and switched directly to the cartoons. I just wanted to enjoy the moment so I didn't say anything to him, but I realized I had to call the facility to let them know. The caretakers arrived 10 minutes later. After a lot of convincing, he got back up and they went back to the facility. 2 days later I called them again and we made a deal. His name is Tom, and I now consider Tom my friend. Every Sunday from the day he returned, Tom and his caretakers visit me to watch cartoons. They say it's the highlight of his week. For several years, I was very afraid of the guy on my patio eating from the ashtray. But now my thoughts are, Tom, let's meet every Sunday to watch cartoons together. It was the weekend on Saturday evening. Kayla's parents had to go to England for a meeting, so they told her to stay home by herself. But before they left, they installed a good security system in the house. At around 5:30 p.m. the next day, she received an email from her dad saying that he had transferred money to the bank and wanted Kayla to withdraw it. She sighed in frustration but had to go to the ATM before it got dark because it could be dangerous. She started off walking the usual 5-minute distance and arrived at the ATM. She noticed a man leaning on the light post to the right of it. He was facing down and was completely shirtless with long black trousers on. Kayla was confused and many questions were running in her head. Why is he looking down and why is he shirtless on a cold November's evening? She quickly withdrew the cash and got out immediately. Kayla turned around to see if the man was still standing there, but he was gone. She sighed in relief, thinking that he had already left. She turned her head and suddenly the man was standing in front of her. Kayla nearly screamed in terror with her heart pounding faster than it ever has, and he was staring at her with soulless cold eyes and a creepy smile on his face. She dared not to open her mouth to ask what was wrong with him. Instead, Kayla took that opportunity to run as fast as she could and pass him by. She ran a good distance away and glanced over her shoulder to see if he was following her. But for some reason, he didn't move from that spot. In less than 3 minutes, she reached her house. Kayla then checked her security cameras to see if that man followed her home, and luckily, he didn't. Feeling paranoid, she decided to sleep on the couch that night near the recording TV. The next morning, Kayla woke up early to go for a run at a nearby park. She was walking into the deeper area of the park where there were no people ahead of her, but then she noticed that somebody was following her. She just thought it might be a regular person walking in a park, so she plugged in her earphones, turned on the music, and continued running. A few seconds later, she felt the ground vibrate with heavy steps of a man, then suddenly the man wrapped his arms around Kayla's waist. Kayla screamed and he remained silent and let go of his left arm from her waist and covered her mouth. She bit his hand until his skin broke and bled. He was screaming in agonizing pain, but was not so foolish to free her from his locked right arm. She immediately turned around to face him, and that's when she saw that it was the same guy from yesterday at the ATM. He lowered his face closer to Kayla and said, "I've never seen such a beautiful girl like you from my whole neighborhood." Kayla was so freaked out and panicked, trying to resist, but the guy wouldn't let go of her. By some miracle, 2 security guards approached him from behind and knocked him down to his feet, handcuffed him, and took him to the police. Kayla asked the security guards how they knew she was in danger. He said that the security team fixed hidden cameras on trees and light posts for visitor safety 3 days ago after there were reports that young teenage girls go missing in this park. Kayla thanked the security guard after saving her life, and he told her not to travel places anymore without an adult. After 15 minutes, the police arrived at the scene and they asked Kayla for details and how it all started. Kayla then called her dad and told him about the incident. The police gave her a ride home and said they would give her an update on the situation. She thanked them for the help and left. 2 days passed. Kayla got a call from the police and they said that they collected all the information and details about the man. He fled from his country and admitted to many felonies and will be sent back to receive his punishments and the death sentence.
Damn, what you do? Shit.
On one Sunday afternoon, Macy and Lily decided to go hiking in some hills about an hour away. It wasn't too difficult of a hike, so they reached the top without any problems. After resting for a bit, they decided to head back down. They had been walking for maybe 10 minutes and Macy started complaining and wanted to walk down the side of the road instead of the rough hiking trail. Lily conceded, but not even after 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It was red and rusty. The guy driving rolled down the window and greeted them, asking if they needed a ride. Macy thought he looked charming and even cute. Lily was hesitant, but despite her better judgment, Macy convinced her to get in the trunk since it must only be a 10-minute drive down to the car, tops. The 2 girls opened the passenger's door to this rusty old thing and the guy directed them behind the seat to get into the back. They settled in and the truck started rumbling forwards. The backseat was clean enough, but there was a rope on the floor behind the driver's seat and 4 boxes of saran wrap half hanging out from under the passenger seat. It seemed creepy and weird, but Lily didn't want to freak Macy out, so she just kept her mouth shut. After 10 minutes, the woods didn't look any clearer, and they hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lily asked how long he thought it would be. He said he was taking a different route down the hill and had to stop somewhere.
Oh my God!
To get something first. Several minutes after, they reached the tiny log cabin. There was an old stump where somebody had been chopping wood and a huge axe was stuck into the log. Lily was definitely on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out of it saying, "I'll be right back, so don't get out, okay?" Lily tried to talk to Macy about how she was incredibly uncomfortable, but she mostly dismissed it. She started begging, increasingly freaked out, and finally put her foot down, demanding Macy to exit the truck with her. The house was around 50 yards in front of them and they wandered around looking at it hesitantly. All of a sudden, Macy thought if this guy really was decent and was just trying to give us a ride, it would be super rude to just run off, right? She actually started to head back into the truck, opening the front door to climb in behind the driver's seat. Lily was pissed off and started yelling at Macy, telling her to not get in the car. But when she opened the door, she saw it. On the driver's side floor, half hidden under the seat, there was a big hatchet. It had dried red-brown stains covering the blade and stuck to the floor under it. Lily understandably lost her mind seeing it and Macy started getting hysterical. They decided that leaving was by far the best option at this point and ran quickly into the trees. In panic, they went around in the trees for a little while until Lily was fairly confident that they were on their way back down the hill. When they finally got down to the bottom and saw...
I mean, if you left the keys and if you did, take the fucking truck. Oh my God, bro.
the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they were relieved. But as they got closer, they saw it. The truck was parked on the other side of the Gravely makeshift lot, just sitting there facing the other way innocently. They couldn't see if anyone was in it, and of course Macy wanted to run for the car, but Lily was super hesitant. This took place when there were no cell phones and there was no ranger station or anyone around. The parking lot was big and empty and open, and who knows what would have happened if they decided to stroll across it. Thankfully, Lily convinced Macy to relax and the two hunkered down against a big tree, hidden in the bushes. Waited it out for what seemed to be a couple of hours when dark started to fall. She was just planning their dash to the car when they heard a clunk. They watched as one of the back doors of their car swung open, and the bearded guy slid his way out of the back seat. He got out the car, shut the door, looking around the surrounding woods for several moments, and then walked back to his truck. Several minutes after watching him drive away, they sprinted to their car as fast as they could, jumped in, and peeled out before they had even shut the doors. It was 6:40 a.m. on a school day, and I was on the stop waiting for my bus to arrive. I've always been a cautious person, and I constantly looked around. As I turned to my left, I see a man. I was kind of creeped out because of how tall he was, and I couldn't see his face. However, it was probably just another guy waiting for the bus, so I shrugged it off. I looked again, and he was standing still. This confused me as I didn't know which way he was staring. Then I looked one more time, and the man is sprinting full speed.
Oh, hell no.
Towards me. He stopped right in front of me and said, "Oh, I thought I was late for this bus." "No, you're not," I said calmly, and got to take a look at his face. He looked like he was around his 40s. Brown hair, messy beard, torn up clothes. We waited.
Okay, I'm gonna stop. But I just peeped that ads are not like video ads anymore. They're like, thank you, YouTube shit.
I had to stop for another 10 minutes and the bus was finally arriving. I stuck my arm out just to make sure the bus driver could see me. As soon as I walked up, I felt the man grab my shoulder and pull me back very hard. I instantly started to panic as both of us are now hid in the darkness of the bus stop. "What are you doing?" I said in a scared voice. It was still dark out and the bus driver obviously didn't see me with the headlights on and the rain pouring. It was at that moment I realized I was in a dark street with a creepy man putting his hands on me, probably making a horrifying face. Slowly, I looked behind my shoulder and the last thing I remembered was him hitting me in the head and knocking me out unconscious. I saw the man sleeping in a bed to my right. The adrenaline was rushing through me and all I could think about was how I could escape. I've had some training in MMA, so I didn't feel too unconfident if I needed to fight for my life. Since the guy was still asleep, I was planning on elbowing him repeatedly in the head while he was still sleeping and then find a way out. I knew this would work if I could do it correctly, so I propped up and walked to his bed. I got my arm ready and instantly he turns his head and sees me above him. I tried to hit him as hard as I could. However, with the fear at that moment, I missed. Again, I started swinging as hard and as fast as possible. But to my surprise, the man didn't block any of my fists at all. He just laid there smiling as his head got pounded. Honestly, it freaked me out even more that he wasn't doing anything. But finally, his face gave in. His nose started to bleed and a cut began to emerge on his face. I started to slow down as I ran out of stamina. His eyes closed and the smile began to fade. Instead of taking a step back, I decided to keep going and kept swinging as hard as I could. I was sure the man was out cold. The man's eyes opened and he smiled and stood up. I saw a window to my left and without hesitation I quickly ran and jumped out of it. I landed on top of a bin. His apartment was only 2 stories high, so it didn't hurt too much. It turns out it wasn't long after he kidnapped me as it was still dark. I ran away and luckily I got back to my home safely. When I got home I realized there was still blood over my hand. I felt my head and there was blood from when he hit me as well. As I rang my doorbell, I heard my dad's footsteps, followed by heavy footsteps to my left. The man followed me and was suddenly there coming towards me. My dad opened the door and I ran straight inside the house and locked it immediately. I explained everything to him. My dad, being the guy he is, swings the door open, fists clenched with me following. As we went outside and looked around, the man reappeared. I went towards him with brass knuckles on, but my father stopped me and muttered, "Hand." I looked at the man's hand to see a knife, and he starts to slice the air. He gets closer and continues to swing the knife maniacally, but manages to barely slice my cheek. My dad grabs him by the arm and beats him senseless. We then called the police, and the man was locked up. Ever since that day, I've become an even more cautious of a person. It took me a while to get over the fear of that day, and that's why I no longer ride on the bus. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spent the time thinking. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. He was very tall and lanky and wearing an old suit. He danced closer until I could make out his face. His eyes were open and wild, head tilted back, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. I decided to cross the street before he could get any closer. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again. He didn't move. The street and sidewalk ahead were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him. And then he started moving towards me again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. I like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all. But I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept towards me. Still smiling, still looking at the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to say was, "Hey, what do you want?" What came out was a whimper. What do you... Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around very slowly and started dance walking away. Just like that, not wanting to turn back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger, and this time he was running straight towards me. I ran until I was off the side road and back into a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his terrifying smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 more months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see.
Alright guys, that's the end. There might have been background noise. I can't do nothing about that. But hope you guys enjoy it. I'm doing this on behalf of Corey being on vacation, but I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do this every Sunday as well, as like I don't know, my own version, I guess. Like it won't. Probably do some shit Saturdays too. Probably some shit Saturdays, but Monday through Friday, gameplay bits, gameplay bits, gameplay bits. Doesn't matter what it is, I'll post whatever the fuck. But anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this, and peace.